Hey people, John here from Fast Films, and today we're going to go through a 2006 crime drama thriller movie called Carla. The movie opens in a regional psychiatric center in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. The session was to determine whether or not Carla, who is in prison, will be eligible for parole. Soon afterward, Carla arrives at the facility and she is welcomed by Dr. Arnold. After exchanging greetings, Carla tells him that she just acquired her degree and Arnold expresses his joy for her. He says it's a great feat to acquire a degree while in prison. Dr. Arnold then gives Carla a photo album of herself and her husband, Paul Bernardo, in happier times. Just then, Carla starts narrating how she met Paul when she was 18 years old. A flashback scene shows Carla and her friend Peggy in a restaurant having a meal when Paul and his friend Nick entered. Carla immediately gets attracted to Paul, who is later granted access to sit with the girls. Minutes after sitting at the girls' table, Paul and Carla go to her hotel room to make out, while Nick and Peggy look at them surprised. Days later, Carla and Paul start seeing each other more, and they engage in wild adult games. Back in the present day, Dr. Arnold tells Carla that Paul informed the authorities that Carla was the one that influenced him to start forcing himself on girls, but Carla denies it. She says Paul has been doing that before they met. Arnold asks if she knew that Paul was a suspect in the Scarborough incidents, and Carla says no. Carla says she once saw a sketch of the criminal and realizes that he looks like Paul. She says Paul's friends all thought the same. Just then, Dr. Arnold says he would like to talk about Carla's sister, Tammy. A flashback scene shows Carla getting jealous about how Paul and Tammy are getting close to each other. She realizes that Paul wanted Tammy because she is a virgin. After confronting Paul, Paul admits that he wants a moment with Tammy, but Carla is the one he loves. One night, Paul tells Carla that if she really loves him, she will give him a pleasure moment with Tammy, and Carla agrees. Paul tells her to get a sedative, halothane, used on dogs from the veterinary clinic where she works. He says they'll use a sedative on Tammy so he can have her without Tammy feeling anything, and Carla agrees. Fast forward to a Christmas night, Paul puts a sedative in Tammy's drink so she can fall asleep. Tammy doesn't fall asleep quickly, so Paul keeps adding more of the sedative to her drink, till she eventually passes out. He then starts filming her and Carla. Afterward, Paul forces himself on Tammy and also tells Carla to join him. During the process, Tammy gets sick and starts choking on her own throw-up. Carla calls 911, and the two hide the assault evidence so the authorities won't suspect them. Tammy is taken to the hospital, but Paul and Carla soon receive a call that she has passed on. Carla asks Paul about the tape, and he tells her that it is safe. A few weeks after Tammy's death, Carla and Paul start making adult movies again. Carla says it was her idea to make Paul happy because he just lost his job. Paul always rewatches the Tammy video and couldn't let go of it. Shortly afterward, Nick tells Paul that he's ready to offer him a job. Paul is to help him smuggle cigarettes, and Paul agrees to it. Soon afterward, Paul starts making lots of money and he buys a house for himself and Carla. The duo will make out and have fun all the time because they are alone. Carla soon realizes that Paul always forces himself on girls. He goes out one night and takes advantage of a girl. He comes back home and tells Carla about it and also shows Carla the girl's jacket which he took from her. Carla knew there was no way she could turn Paul in because he still has the videotape of Tammy's death. Paul then tells Carla that he will be traveling to Florida for 10 days. During Paul's absence at home, Carla thought about her sister and the girl Paul took advantage of. Days later, Paul arrives home. While he's having a chat with Carla, Paul tells her that he made out with another girl in Florida and Carla only loves him more. Later that night, Paul gets dressed and leaves the house. Paul then stalks a girl, Tina, and forces her into his car. He then blindfolds Tina and brings her home. He starts doing everything he wants with Tina, and soon Carla tells him that she is tired of being alone because Paul spends all his time with Tina. Paul then asks Carla to join him while they make out with Tina. Paul then asks Carla to join him, and while they make out with Tina, she opens her eyes and sees Paul. Horrified, Paul tells Carla that they have to terminate Tina because she has seen their faces. Carla is hesitant, but later agrees after Paul convinces her that Tina can identify them. Paul then strangles Tina with a rope till she dies. Paul beats Carla for acting scared. The next day, Paul cuts Tina's body into pieces and seals them in cement blocks, which he then dumps into a lake. Soon afterward, Paul and Carla get married, and she tells Paul that she wants them to go back to being a normal couple. Later that day, Tina's body is discovered and identified by dental records. Carla looks scared upon hearing the news from her neighbor, Molly. Paul hits Carla after Molly leaves the house to punish her for her behavior. Paul then stops abducting and taking advantage of girls for a while, but the frustration starts showing on him. One day, while having a party at his home with his friends, Paul starts making out with another woman in front of his friends. This prompts Nick to fight him and says he's not worthy of Carla. Paul retaliates and the duo engage in a struggle in which Carla intervenes and separates them. Nick then tells Paul that he is done with him. Due to his frustration, Paul starts losing his friends. Weeks later, Carla decides that she wants to make Paul happy. She then chooses to join Paul in abducting a girl, Caitlin Ross. Carla tricks Caitlin into giving them directions, and Paul uses the opportunity to force Caitlin into the car. During the process, one of Caitlin's shoes fall off without Paul and Carla knowing. Upon getting home, the duo is about to start making out with Caitlin when Carla notices that one of her shoes is missing. The police are then seen on the crime scene trying to figure out what happened. The cops also inform Caitlin's parents of her abduction. Soon afterward, Paul starts taking advantage of Caitlin while Carla watches and begins to cry. Paul hits her for ruining the moment for him. He leaves and puts Carla in charge of Caitlin. He gives Carla a mallet to use on Caitlin if she tries to escape. Caitlin asks Carla if Paul usually beats her, and she says yes. Apparently, Carla is afraid if she frees Caitlin, Paul would terminate her. Up next, Paul sees a new article about Caitlin when her parents are begging her captors to let her go. Carla goes to the bathroom to take a shower, and upon returning, she sees that Paul has terminated Caitlin to avoid attention. Back in the present day, Dr. Arnold asks Carla how it felt to watch Caitlin die, and she says it was easy because it wasn't the first time. Arnold then tells her that Paul informed the authorities that she was the one that terminated Caitlin with the mallet Paul gave her, but she denies it. Arnold insists that she's the one, and this infuriates Carla. Arnold then says even if she didn't terminate Caitlin, Tammy's death is on her hands, and this upsets Carla the more. A flashback scene then shows Caitlin's body being discovered by the authorities. They conclude that the killer is not working alone. Soon afterward, Paul receives a visit from the police, and they ask him a series of questions, which he answers calmly. After getting a satisfactory answer from Paul, the cops leave. Later that night, Paul hides all the tapes he has of his victims and also hits Carla for not smiling at his jokes. Up next, Carla and Paul are going through the border during one of their usual smuggling deals. Upon getting to the border, the security asks Carla a question, and she replies. The security is not satisfied with the answer and tells them to come down and open the car's trunk. After seeing that there is nothing incriminating, they let them go. Paul is infuriated by this and severely beats Carla. Upon getting home, Carla tries to make peace with Paul, but he resorts to beating her again. Carla then calls Molly and asks for her help. Molly shows up and tries to take Carla away, but Paul convinces her that he loves her. Carla then decides to stay. During the night, Paul beats Carla and locks her in the cellar for trying to leave him. The next day, Carla tells Molly that she is now ready to leave Paul. Carla then reports the issue to the authorities, and Paul is booked for just one night, but Carla doesn't return home. However, this renewed the cops' interest in Paul when one of the DNA samples he provided matched the one found on one of the victims. The detective in charge then orders that Paul should be put under 24/7 surveillance. Soon afterward, Carla goes to a lawyer to tell him everything she knows. She asks him for immunity if she cooperates. Later on, Carla goes to a club to have fun and she meets a man. She follows the man to his house and they make out. The next day, Carla learns on the news that Paul has been arrested in connection to the crimes. The cops also put an APB on Carla and she is soon arrested too. During the trial, Paul testifies that Carla terminated Caitlin Ross with a mallet. However, Carla denies all the crimes. Paul is convicted on 2 counts of murder without any possibility of parole. Carla is given a sentence of 12 years in exchange for a guilty plea for manslaughter. This causes a mass protest throughout the nation because they believe that Carla was given a light sentence. A title card then shows us more information about Carla. The Carla Homolka is a person highly artificial, articulate, manipulative, who is egocentric, if not narcissistic, and whose behavior cannot be explained solely on the basis of intimidation by Paul Bernardo. The report went on to note, despite her ability to present herself well, there is moral vacuity and absence of empathy for her victims, which suggests tendencies towards psychosis. Carla was denied parole. During her remaining years in prison, she maintained a romantic relationship with a male prisoner convicted of terminating his girlfriend. On July 4, 2005, after serving her full 12-year term, she was released. Citing her absence of remorse or insight, the court determined her to be a continuing threat to society and imposed various restrictions on her freedom. The families of the teenage victims of her crimes noted in October 2005 that, as of that time, Carla Homolka hasn't apologized to them or communicated remorse or regret in any way. Thanks for watching, guys.